Today I invite you to come along on a cutting journey on the gem cutter's craft. I wanted to take you along the process of cutting this Aquamarine. I've got a brand new faceting machine that I've been learning how to use, and I thought today was the perfect day to make a video journey. So after inspecting my stone and deciding that I'm going to cut a round mix cut, which I think will really work with this stone's color and its pastel nature, as well as its inclusions, I'm going to start my faceting journey with preforming. So the preforming step happens completely by hand, so you'll see that the stone is in my hand loose, and I'm working the stone, taking off the edges, rounding it, trying to remove as many of the inclusions as I can, all the while trying to maintain as much of the stone's mass and weight that's possible. Here you can see my preform shape. I've got a table, I've got a pretty much roundish outline, as well as a tapered bottom that's going to be my pavilion. Part of my exercise today is using the FraLap's new cam preformer. So in order to use the cam preformer, I need to first dop the stone. So I'm going to heat up my wax over the flame and prepare my dop. So I want this to be tapered towards a point and smooth and strong, so that when I put my stone into the wax and attach it, it holds the stone tightly. Once my stone's warm and my dop is warm, I put them together against the wood and I make my attachment. Now I need to make sure that the stone is centered and cleaned and adjust it so that when I go to cut the stone, it's perfectly ready to go. Centering is important here because I'm going to use a round cam shape. So if my stone isn't centered on the dop, I'm just going to end up cutting off more stone than I need to. Now, one of the unique aspects to this machine is this dopping adapter. So if I set my stick into the adapter and push my preform table against the metal plate, it will perfectly straighten the stone for me, so I know that my table's at a 90-degree angle from the dop, though I still need to make sure that my stone is centered. Once I'm happy with the centering, I put the dop into this cam preformer. Notice I've got a white plastic cam ring on here. It's round, so this is my round shape. And so all I need to do, theoretically, is to spin the stone while holding it against the lap, and it should cut everything to a round shape. Now this is easier said than done on this machine, and this is really only my first time using the round cam preformer, so I wasn't exactly sure what the technique should be. There's a adjustable plate that the cam sits on that I have to raise up and down to precisely get it to the height I need. But once it's there, and I'm happy with my round shape, I can put the stick into the mechanical case, and now it's time to flatten my table. So I've recently added this table cutting adapter onto my machine, which is very handy to do this step, which is just making sure that the table's cut at a perfect 90-degree angle from the dop. Once I've got my table cut in, I'm going to switch to a finer lap. So this was my preforming lap. I'm now going to switch to my centered 600 lap and cut the table in again at a finer grit. So just a few seconds on this lap will take off that 100 grit preforming skin, and now I'll have a very fine table and also go around and take off the skin from the 100 grit preforming lap so that my girdle will be ready for polishing. Now that I'm ready to start the faceting, I need to make sure that my faceting Jambpeg head is properly height adjusted for my lap. So I have to do this on each lap. Notice I'm using the table adapter to do this. It's just a little extra feature that the table adapter can do. And now before I start, I want to double check my crown main angle. I always like to cut my crown mains about 35 degrees, so I use this electronic angle box to tell me which hole gives me approximately a 35-degree crown mains. Once I've written that down, it's time to start cutting, and I'm going to go around and cut all 8 mains for a brilliant style crown. And it just takes a few seconds on each facet. I go around the 8-sided stick on the hole that I've figured out. And once I've got all of my facets cut into the same size, you can see my table looks centered like a perfect stop sign, and everything is balanced. All of the lines that make up the table and all the widths of each facet are exactly the same. So once I'm happy with that balance, I can go ahead and go on to my stars. So I figured out a hole that will cut my star facets, and I've got to double check that to make sure the angle is correct for the width and height that I want the stars to be. Once I'm happy with that, I can go around and cut each star to the same width so that they're all touching and the same size. These facets cut in very quick, so it's literally one touch, 1 second, and once I've got the rhythm, it's very, very simple. Notice now all my stars are touching or just about touching, and they're all the same height. So my final step for the crown cutting is the break facets. So I need to test an angle that's going to work for those facets based upon my mains. I also need to figure out which index is going to cut those facets and make the perfect V shape that touches the stars and touches the breaks. So it turns out that 2 holes lower than my mains, and I set my mechanical stick to +2 and then later to -2 on the index. So unlike the American or the handpiece style, I can only do one set of facets at a time. So I either do the left side breaks or the right side breaks. I do all 8 of them. And here you can see I've got all of the right side breaks, so only one of the breaks is there. Now I switch to my -2 setting on the mechanical stick, and I go ahead and I do all of the rest of the breaks that I didn't do already. Meanwhile, I've written down all of my holes and all of my index settings so that when I go on to polish, I know exactly how to get back and polish these facets. So notice here my entire crown is done. Mains, stars, breaks, everything's well proportioned, and I just have small gaps between each facet to allow me to polish in. So now I'm going to take off my 600 centered lap and get rid of my wastewater, and then switch to my tin lead polishing lap, and I'll go ahead and prepare it by scoring. So this lap is set up with 2 different grits, a 0-1 on the inside, 0-5 on the outside, giving me a polish and pre-polish, and I've got to individually score both of the rings so that I don't cross-contaminate them. So I've got a razor blade and I'm just making a cross-hatching pattern and then applying my diamond powder. The 0-1 on the inside ring and spread it all around, and then once I have that whole layer done, I'm going to go and make a layer of 0-5 diamond powder on the outside ring. Once I've got my lap set up, I need to adjust my Jambpeg height again. So the reason why we do this is so that the holes stay the same on every lap. So no matter what your lap height is, a 12 hole will always be the same angle as a 12 hole for every lap. So all of my settings follow from one lap to the next. And now I just have to go back and polish each one of the facets that I cut in. So I start with the mains, I do pre-polish, then wipe off the grease, and do the final polish on the inside, and I go around and I do each one of the facets until all of my mains are perfectly shiny with no scratches and no overlapping facet lines. Once I'm happy with all of those facets, I do the table, And here you can see my mains and my table are completely polished, very shiny, and I'm now ready to move on to my stars and then go on to my breaks. So I'm going to go around and polish each one of the stars at the same hole that I cut them at. It just takes a second because these facets are really small, but I just need to make sure that they all come in and meet each other at the table so that the table is perfectly met up. And here you can see all of my stars are the same size, and my table now is perfectly balanced inside those stars, and it's time to go on and polish my break facets. So a couple seconds on the outside ring, and then 1 second on the inside ring, and that grows my break facets to meet each other, to meet the stars, and to take off any of the old skin and get everything nice and polished. My final step is to polish the outside girdle ring. So I just do this freehand because it's pretty quick and easy. And then once I am happy with the polish of the girdle, I can now think about starting to flip over the stone. And here you can see everything's nicely polished, nicely proportioned. So once this side is completely finished, I can take the stone and dop out of the mechanical stick, and I can now heat up the wax and pull the stone off. I want to pull off any of that extra wax, and then I'll prepare my dop again, and I just flip the stone over and put it back on the same wax dop. So this time, table down, pavilion up, and I want to make sure that it's even and centered by eye, and I also want to make sure that the girdle line is perfectly horizontal, and I can use my dopping adapter to do this. There's 2 parallel lines that are cut into the back face of this dopping adapter, and I'm just looking at the girdle and looking at the adapter and making sure that it's perfectly balanced. And I do this all by eye. Once I'm happy with the balance, I put the dop back into the case. I realign the height of my Jambpeg head. I first want to figure out what's the critical angle, which hole is going to cut around 42 degrees, which is a hole that I like to use for Aquamarine. And then from that hole, that angle, I'm going to build a design around it. So I'm going to write that down, and I'm going to write down some ideas that I have for what the other 2 angles of this step cut are going to be. And then I start to cut. So first I'm going to cut tier 1. This is establishing my girdle line. So there's going to be 8 facets on each tier, and there's going to be 3 tiers. So this starts with tier 1, and I have to cut all 8 in, make sure that the girdle is perfectly balanced. And then once I'm happy with those 8 and they're all the same size, I can go on and do tier 2, and then tier 3. So here you can see tier 1 is halfway done. I'm establishing the girdle line. I'm making sure that all the facets are the same height, same width, and they come to a cullet point. And then now I go through and make the girdle line the correct thickness, which is not too thick, not too thin. And then I'll cut in my tier 2, which you can see here. So notice that line that goes around perfectly parallel with the girdle. And then now I'm going to cut in tier 3. Tier 3 is very quick, just like the stars were on top. Tier 3 is very small, and again, just a perfectly parallel line all the way around. So I've got a nice 3-step step cut. Everything's aligned and set up for polishing. So now in order to start polishing, I need to switch my lap. So I'm going to take off the 600 grit centered, switch back to my pewter lap, and I don't need to dress it this time. I don't need to score it because it's still set up from the top side. I probably don't need to add anything, just realign my Jambpeg height so that I know that my holes are going to line up the way that they did in cutting, and then just get ready and start to polish the facets, starting with tier 1. So I go through, pre-polish, and then polish each facet, making sure that all of the scratches are off by the end and that all of the tier is aligned and balanced. So here you can see the difference between the shininess of tier 1 and the frostiness of tier 2 and 3. Everything was going great, and then disaster struck. My stone popped off the dop, the wax broke, so I need to realign it, readjust it, and try to make sure that all the facets are going to line up. So this is a little tricky, but I got it aligned and balanced, no problem. A little bit of the cheater comes in here to make sure that all the facets are lining up to the original cut. After only a few seconds, I was able to get that done, and now I proceed to polish tier 2, going around, polishing each facet, and everything is looking really, really good this time. Everything has been aligned again. And then finally, I finish all 3 tiers of polish. I take the stone off the dop, and once I've cleaned it, we can see I've got a very nice reflection pattern in this round mix cut. So I've got a brilliant top, I've got a step cut bottom, and all of the lines are straight and even. My preformer worked well, though I feel like I lost a little bit more stone than I needed to, still getting the hang of that cam preformer. But I'm still happy with the stone, happy with the sparkle and the shine, and we've got one more stone in the bag. Thanks for going on this journey with me, and come back next time for another episode of the Gem Cutter's Craft. See you then.